Thank you so much. I love the energy in this room. So accolades aside, there's two things that qualify me to stand up here. The first reason is my third child, who I birthed. Well, I didn't birth her. The surgeon birthed him. Was a 10-pound baby that left me with constant incontinence for 3 months, both urinary and fecal incontinence. Talk about anti-sexual. And so I can absolutely personally relate to the struggles when it comes to sexuality. I also had two older kids at the same time. You can figure that out. The other reason that qualifies me to stand up here is I still haven't had the period talk from my parents, and I'm 43 years old. So I grew up in a staunchly Catholic, new immigrant Italian family where just about every prohibition around sex, right down to even if you think about sex before you're married, you know, that's tantamount to committing a horrible, horrible sin. And of course, I believed at the time. It wasn't until I was 21 that I didn't even put in my own first tampon. I had my best friend put a tampon in me because I was afraid of breaking my virginity. Because again, that was one of the things that I was told. So here I am, I survived, I'm a sex researcher, I'm a sex therapist, I'm liberated. And I'm here to make sure that you don't go through the same things I went through. And I was just telling Janessa, my 13-year-old daughter went to her first party last night, and so I was at work early this morning, and she sent me a text about 7 a.m., and I said, you know, how was the party last night? She said, really good, just so you know, I played spin the bottle. And she said, are you mad at me? And I wrote back, of course not. And then I said, can't wait to hear about it tonight. And I haven't seen her yet. I'll see her in about an hour. So 20% of us in this room, that's 1 in 5 women, 1 in 5 women who are in relationships have not had sex in the past year. That's 1 in 5 women have not had sex in the past year. That's not including masturbation, which I'll get to, don't worry. Everything's coming out of the closet tonight, masturbation, vibrators included. 20% of women in the last year have not had sexual activity. And that might seem like such a paradox, given that we live in what some would argue to be such a sex-saturated society, right? So we can't stand in line at the grocery stores without being bombarded with top 10 reasons why you should be a better lover and how to please your lover and how to find the spot, etc. I can pick up my phone and in about 2.5 seconds, I can find an array of pornography. And with one quick swipe to the right and about 300 meters, I can find a sex partner just outside the door. And yet we're bombarded with prohibitions, negative beliefs around sex, and high rates of sexual problems. And as a sex therapist, I see women of all shapes, sizes, ages, colors, demographics, geographic orientations, religions, etc. And one of the biggest problems is that when we have sexual concerns, we don't talk about it. We assume that we are broken, that we're the only one that's experiencing this concern. It's embarrassing. Most women with low desire will not talk to a healthcare provider about it. And when we do talk to a healthcare provider about it, we're often dismissed. What's wrong with you? Maybe you're frigid. Maybe you should have a glass of wine. Do you still like your partner? Are you still attracted to your partner? And all of that reinforces our tendency to keep these concerns to ourselves. And so rates of sexual concerns have been increasing over time, including in young women. And by young, I mean women like my daughter's age. So what I wanted to do is I really wanted to talk about some of the more common sex-related myths, the top 10 sex myths. And make no mistake, the statements that I'm going to have on the slides that follow are all myths. And because I'm a scientist and a bit of a sex geek, I'm going to fold in as much of the science as I can, rather than spouting off as if it were my own opinion. So who remembers their 6-week postpartum visit? Hands up if you remember, right? The visit where you're looking for, are things healed down there? Am I given the A-OK? Has my baby reversed that weight loss curve? And when the doctor gives you the thumbs up, the A-OK, the high five, I can tell you that many women leave that office with dread because they know they will go home and the partner's like, and you're like, no, off limits. Taboo number 1, the 6-week OK check, even if your vulva and your vagina and your perineum are all healed and fine, is not an A-OK to have sex. There is only one thing that indicates when you're ready to have sex, and it's this. It's your mouth. When you say, I consent, I'm ready, I want this. That is the only thing. Vaginal lubrication does not mean you're ready to have sex. Tingling on the back of your neck does not mean you're ready to have sex. A healed perineum does not mean you're ready to have sex. It's your mouth. That is the only thing. And I think that's a message that we need to tell all the boys out there. I was going to say tell the girls, but I think the boys need to hear it. So let's start with some top 10 myths. So myth number 1, we are born with a set level of sexual desire. And so when we believe that we have a set level of sexual desire, we end up getting really upset and distressed when we've deviated from that set level. We set out on this quest to find my mojo, right? We start reading, we start looking for it. Where's my mojo? I need to get it back to that level, to that 7.5 on an 8-point scale when it felt this way. And the reality is none of us are born with a set point level of desire. Think about your own life and your own fluctuations of sexual desire. How many of you are in a long-term relationship, which is anything longer than 6 months, by the way? That's long-term. Yeah. Chances are you've experienced firsthand changes in sexual desire. When you've been married almost 20 years like me, it's usually this way, right? Sometimes it goes up a little bit, usually it's a nosedive. And yet we have women who might find themselves in a new relationship, including my 82-year-old mother-in-law, who suddenly has rediscovered her desire again. If desire were set and fixed, we would not experience the peaks in sexual desire when there's novelty and newness, and we would not experience the decline in sexual desire. So one of the first myths I want to debunk immediately is that we don't have a set point. Don't think that you're someone who just has a low level of desire, because guess what? We can cultivate it, and I've spent my career trying to figure out how to cultivate desire, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. Number 2, if you love your partner, you will want to have sex with them. Wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Again, think in your own life. I won't ask for a show of hands, unless you want. Who has ever had a one-night stand, sex with a friend, friends with benefits, revenge sex? I know you're all putting your hands up underneath your chairs, right? Where love was not part of the equation. Now, don't get me wrong. Love and sex often go hand in hand. And when sex happens within the context of a loving relationship, it can be fabulous. But one does not guarantee the other. And what I mean by that is just because you're in a fabulous, committed, loving, trusting relationship is not a guarantee against changes in sexuality or changes in sexual desire specifically. And at the same time, not all sexual problems need relationship therapy. So sometimes we really need to look at both of those domains. How's my kind of emotional temperature between myself and my partner, regardless of if it's a short-term or a long-term relationship? And separate from that, how is the sex? Now, sometimes partners ask if there's been a decline in a woman's desire. Do you not love me anymore? Right? That's probably one of the most common things I get when I interview partners. Maybe she doesn't love me anymore. And so really important to reassure the partner. Love and sex, again, sometimes it's great when they go hand in hand, but often they don't. All right, myth number 3. Getting my emotional, even sensual fill from my child is abnormal. So think about, for those of you who can remember having a newborn at home and maybe having the opportunity to spend a day with that newborn, where you're drinking in their smell, where you're looking at them head to toe, where you're nuzzling your nose between their belly, where you're looking deeply into their eyes, and anytime you open your mouth, that child coos and smiles, where the feel of their palm on the back of your waist feels so much better than a flat hand slap to the ass. So much better. Come on, I know you like that. No, I don't. I don't like it. And so in some ways, that kind of emotional, spiritual, physical connection between a mother and her infant is something that sex can only rival. And so what this means then is that when a partner arrives on scene and you've had your emotional fill, you've drunk in every part of that child, you feel completely emotionally, spiritually, lovingly, sensually fulfilled. If that sex doesn't give you something above and beyond the connection that's already been fulfilled, you're going to resent it because you'll see it as yet another chore to do. And that's something we don't talk about. We don't talk about the feelings, including the sensual feelings that connecting with an infant gives us. And then we expect ourselves to have this separate reserve for sex, when the reality is, for a lot of women, there's nothing that the sex gives them. So don't worry, we're going to get to some solutions in a bit. We're going to hammer out these myths first. As long as my partner pushes my arousal button, all will be good. I will respond. The elusive arousal button. And why is it that we know exactly where it is, and they still can't find it? It's right there. I'm touching there. No, you're not. It's right there. And yet part of the problem is that many of us have embarrassment around showing a partner what we like, how to be touched, how to be stimulated. Many more of us might not even know where our own arousal buttons are. And one of the things with arousal buttons is that they're elusive and evasive, sort of like a clean kitchen, right? Like, it's a great idea, kind of a moving target. So rather than fixate on this idea of a single arousal button that it's my partner's job to discover, communicate. Talk about what you want. Explore what you want. Give yourself permission. And remember that the feelings of the arousal button, and please, there is no arousal button. I wanted to make sure I debunked that. There is no single arousal button. We still can't agree if the G-spot exists. That the sensations when areas of our body are stimulated change, not only over the course of a cycle or over the course of a woman's reproductive stages over the course of her life, but they're influenced by what you've eaten, your energy levels, how much water you've consumed, what medications you're on. So yes, indeed, the feeling of touching the arousal button today and doing the same touch tomorrow may not produce the same feeling. And so here again is where communication comes in. The body should be treated as a brand new canvas every time, something to play with. All right. We're just going to debunk this one right now. Go ahead, I'll give you a few minutes. I won't ask. Fantasy is not the same as cheating on a partner. Thinking something is not the same as doing something, and thinking something will not increase your chances of doing something any more than me thinking about doing a crazy dance on the stage right now will increase my chances of doing it. The truth is that for many of us, our erotic imaginations have dried up, and they've been consumed with the mundane tasks of our lives, right? Birthday parties, PTA meetings, pack, spin the bottle, all those things. And yet our erotic imagination is an opportunity for us to look inside and say, who do I want to be sexually, even if just in my imagination? It's a place where you can play with your identity. It's a place where you can take risks. And yes, you can do and have sex with whomever you want because no one will ask. And you're not hurting anyone when it stays in your fantasy. So I want to be sensitive to the fact that many of us have been cheated on, and it doesn't feel good. And there are many circulating myths around the impact of pornography, the impact of dating apps, and yes, the impact of fantasy on being unfaithful to a partner. Often those things on their own do not contribute to infidelity in a relationship. Infidelity is really tricky, and this talk is not about infidelity, but some of us, I think, might be so quick to put our finger on one cause, like fantasy, when often it's much more complex than that. So go ahead, fantasize away. All right, there's a separate gas tank for sex. Okay, show of hands, how many of you have sex only at night after the news? How many of you have a belief that you should be having sex at night? Because that's when people have sex, right? We all have sex at night, right? That's when sex happens. People get on their sexy time. And let me tell you, if your 11 o'clock news involves watching Donald Trump, that's about the most anti-sexual thing that you can do. Not very sexual at all. So our energy levels, our mood, our sense of vitality, the conversations we've had in the day, the amount of erotic imagination that we've been able to cultivate over the course of the day, all of those contribute to our enjoyment of sex. And what else do you do in your life that happens totally spontaneously? I mean, the reality is, if we're going to sit around and wait for something to just happen, chances are it already has. We need to plan it. And it needs to be planned for a time in the same way that we plan exercise and we plan our self-care, we need to plan sex. And it should be planned for a time when you feel your best, when you love yourself, when you have energy, when you have the ability to say, this is what I want. This is how I want to feel good. This is how to pleasure me. That's when we should be having sex, not after watching Donald Trump. Sexual desire declines in a relationship only if the sex is bad. Well, sexual desire declines in a long-term relationship when the sex is bad. Sexual desire declines in a long-term relationship when the sex is good. Sexual desire declines in any long-term relationship almost universally. This does not mean you have a sexual dysfunction. This does not mean you're abnormal. It means that all of the things that perhaps you sought out in a long-term companion, stability, predictability, dependability, trust, ability to know the person, are all of the things that suffocate out sexual desire. When you think about your own life, a time where your sexual desire was maybe fantastic or at its peak, and it doesn't matter what age you were, it was a time when there was an element of danger, mystery, novelty, unknown, maybe risk, a bridge to cross, a divide to get through. Everything that's antithetical to being in a long-term relationship. So how do we hold this paradox? This paradox of, for those of you who are in a committed long-term relationship, keeping all of those wonderful qualities of dependability, predictability, etc., and infuse some space. And we need to debunk pop culture ideas that our partners need to be our soulmate. They need to be our best friend. They need to be our lover. They need to be a partner. They need to be our co-parent. They need to be a confidant. They need to be someone to console us when we're sad. They need to give us business advice. They need to be able to comment on our clothes. They need to be financially savvy. We need space. And space is where desire resides. Space is in the unknown. It's in the distance. So find ways to admire your partner from behind the podium. Watch them do something in their element. Watch others flirt with them. Show up when your partner doesn't know that you're going to be there. And then admire them. And that's the space where desire resides. Once you lose your desire, it's impossible to get it back. So I think, hopefully, as I've tried to debunk this idea that sexual desire is static, that it can go up and it can go down, we also know that desire is something that can be cultivated. So when you think about any of your own emotions, let's say happiness, when are we happy? Well, we're not born with a certain level of happiness. We might be born with a certain predispositions to being happier or not so happy. But we feel happy when happy things happen to us, right? When someone says something that makes us feel good, when we see something that makes us smile, when we hear something that's endearing, that's what makes us feel happy. Desire is exactly the same. We feel desire when it's elicited, right? And it's not necessarily from the kinds of traditional things that we think, like the arousal button. Sometimes, and like I often say to women I work with, foreplay is not what happens 5 minutes before sex. It's what starts immediately after your last orgasm. That's when foreplay starts. And so sometimes foreplay is a month, depending on how frequently you have sexual activity. So the idea is that sexual desire is what we cultivate. And so if you're someone who feels like you've lost desire for sex, I would invite you to think about maybe you've lost desire for the sex you're having, not lost desire for sex. And it allows us to look at what can we do to cultivate, to put those triggers back in place, to infuse some novelty. Second to last myth. The drop in my sex drive is hormonal. Wouldn't it be so much easier if we could just point our finger to this hormone that's off kilter and then find the medical treatment to be able to restore us to that certain level? And the science on sexual desire and hormones has been absolutely chaotic and messy at best. The science has swung every way from everything is completely testosterone all the way through to testosterone plays absolutely no role at all. Now, if you're a breastfeeding woman, that means you're hormonally equivalent to a postmenopausal woman, fully equipped with vulvovaginal atrophy, pain, dryness, and all. And I would be hard-pressed to convince a breastfeeding woman right now that hormones don't matter. Of course they do. When sex is painful, your interest in sex will go down. But apart from that situation and a few others, for the most part, hormones contribute just about as much to your sexual desire as your eye color does. They contribute very little. Your mood, your levels of stress, your sense of self, your body image, your confidence, your love of yourself contribute so much more. So to all the postmenopausal mamas in the audience, that's not the end of sex whatsoever. Thinking about continuing to be sexually active through the menopausal years and beyond is a very strong predictor. Your expectations that you will continue to be sexual is a major predictor that's been found in about 18 different studies that have been done across the world. And so we'll continue to look for the hormone, we'll continue to look for the neurotransmitter and the place in the brain that contribute the most to sexual desire, but I don't think that we're ever going to find a single one. And finally, oh, this is a good one. We don't want to lose this one. Trust me, you don't want to lose this one because I'm suddenly going to give you all permission, ladies. Last but not least, I'm a sex freak if I use a vibrator or lube or read something erotic, or ... Women's sexuality has been pathologized for at least 300 years. If our sex drive was too high, we were labeled as nymphomaniac, and that was a diagnosed psychiatric condition. If our sex drive was too low, we were labeled as frigid and also hysterical. The reality is that for generations, women's sex drive has been pathologized, and we've been told it's not right, it's too little, it's too high, it's not good enough. And I think we need to stop. Canadian survey indicates that about 60% of women have used a vibrator in the last year, and I happen to know a few of those women, and they're mighty fine women, I would say. And I like to think of a vibrator as a tool. So in the same way that you set an alarm clock in the morning to wake up, that you use a toaster to toast your bread, right? We have the little tools in our life to make things more convenient, the microwave to heat up our leftover lunch. Sometimes we use a vibrator to make arousal more efficient, more potent, more reliable. There is absolutely no relationship between a woman's wish to use a vibrator and her level of freakness. Well, you know what I mean, maybe. Janessa says maybe. The other thing I'll say is about lube. And I just want to give all women permission to use a lubricant. If you're having sexual activity, sex and lube should just go hand in hand, literally, and hand to vulva, hand to clitoris. Using a lubricant, again, does not mean you have a sexual problem, and it's not just reserved for women in the postmenopausal phase or women who are breastfeeding. Those tend to be moisturizers to help with some of the vulvovaginal atrophy and pain. So lubricants, do yourself a favor, get some lube. So what can I leave you with? I think I'm going to leave you with really the same message that Amy and Janessa left you with. And that is, ultimately it comes down to one thing. Yes, we can read the top 10 list. You can read my fabulous book, which is chock full of science. But it's one thing, and that is love yourself. Because when you love yourself, you ask for the help that you need. When you love yourself, you tune in and get help for depression and anxiety. When you love yourself, you accept that there's going to be rolls and folds and incontinence and stretched skin and things you don't like as a result of aging, as a result of having kids, and it doesn't matter. And when you love yourself, you will not put up with a mediocre partner who doesn't ask you, how does that feel? So love yourself, ladies. It's the best thing you can do for your sex. Thank you.